And now I'd like to bring in Mr. Chris Burgess, former CIA officer, and Yaron Schneider, Arab Affairs Correspondent for Israel's Channel 12 News. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us today. We'll start with you, Chris. Let's speak about Iran's involvement, sending everything it can, or nearly everything, from Lebanon and Syria and Yemen and obviously Gaza, but staying away, keeping very much dry.
They're attempting to provide themselves some plausible deniability, but I believe all of your viewers and you yourself understand that they are also expert at the provisioning of third parties to carry their water, if you will.
Okay, how do you see Iran's involvement, from now on? Because we've seen them stepping up their actions, mainly by the Houthis, but in Lebanon as well. I mean, the last few days of fighting were much more hectic than the ones that we've seen in the past few weeks.
I find it very interesting that the Houthis are using ballistic missiles. That they're attacking U.S. drones and ships in the area, the Red Sea, and also launching attacks 900 miles away, 1,200 kilometers towards Israel, and all of those are being taken down. But again, I see it as Iran's hand using somebody else, so that the U.S. won't retaliate directly against Iran. But as Secretary Austin said, those entities that are attacking U.S. forces in the area will receive return fire.
Yaron Schneider, good evening. Let's look at all different fronts, starting by the Houthis. They've been firing, they've been kidnapping a ship yesterday. Who calls the shots, Tehran or Yemen?
Well, Yoav, I think that they're definitely under the umbrella of Iran. And as we can understand, it's a long process in which Iran, I would say, became the sponsor of the Houthis, which actually existed long before they participated in the attacks against Israel. They are rooted in Yemen. They are part of a domestic struggle in Yemen, although for arms supply and for getting involved in military activities, they were supported from a very early period by Iran. And Iran supplied them with all these facilities and very advanced weapons that we see now in action, ballistic missiles, all the UVAs, all the facilities that enable them to actually go much beyond the borders of Yemen. So I can say that they are surely part of the network that Iran utilizes in the region in order to attack its enemies and deny, as the gentleman said before, deny its direct involvement. And this system, as we see it now, exists also in the front against Israel.
And the northern front, Yaron, I mean, it's a multiple northern front. The most disturbing one, obviously, is Lebanon and the Hezbollah, but we have Syria and the militias, and Iraq and the militias, which didn't involve yet in the war, but they're on the sidelines.
Sure. And this is another front. Yes.
Yes, Yaron, we're with you.
Please.
I say this is another front that we actually witnessed its, I would say, development during the previous years. We know about the attacks against those pro-Iranian militias in Syria years before. And now we see that they are, as you said, they are on standby. Although right now, today, we are in confrontation with Hezbollah. And some might say that it is actually a war. Maybe not a war as we have now in Gaza, but even if it's less than what we actually have now in Gaza, It is a war, and Hezbollah is actually taking part in this regional reaction led by Iran to the war in Gaza. And there you have it. It's another front that is actually being utilized right now, and Iran is definitely the sponsor there, as it is on the Houthis in Yemen.
Chris, how much disturbed Israel need to be looking at Iran? And in other words, should we be concerned that Hezbollah or other forces will practically open a full-scale war against Israel?
I think that would be nirvana for Iran. But I also think that Hezbollah and the Houthis really don't want to be eliminated, that they'd like to be there at the end of the day. And thus, I think you're going to see limited engagement using the tools that the IRGC provides to these elements.
And do you see any potential for an American involvement in that war, or they're still on the sidelines saying we just say that if Israel is to be attacked by Hezbollah or Iran, we might intervene?
I think they went far beyond we might intervene. I think it was very clearly stated that should that occur, that the United States will intervene.
Owen, you wanna say something about that, about the American involvement?
Well, listen, I agree. I mean, Joe Biden used the word, right? The one word, don't. It feels like a long time ago, right? It was the first week of the war, but I think that it still rings in our ears. And he's put American credibility on the line, you have, in a way that goes far beyond the Middle East. He has framed this, including in his op-ed to the Washington Post, which was wrongly reduced by Israeli media to one sentence about the Palestinian Authority, where the real story in that op-ed was Joe Biden continuing to frame this as part of strengthening the American alliance system around the world, linking Israel to Ukraine, and for that matter, to the Indo-Pacific. He sees this as a test of the American alliance system arrayed against Russia, China, and for that matter, Iran, as nothing less than that. He's put American credibility on the line on purpose because he wants it to be there, because he sees this as America's interest in confronting those other powers. So yes, I think he's made it very clear that he feels he needs to intervene should the war spread. That said, like any guarantor of a loan, right, he exercises some control over how the person uses the money and conducts his business, so he's able to repay the loan, and for that matter, again, has some influence over Israeli decision-making not to open up that front in Lebanon.
But let me dare you on that. Maybe the don't wasn't only towards Iran and Hezbollah. Maybe it was towards Israel as well. Don't attack Hezbollah. Don't get into a war.
Well, listen, I mean, strictly speaking, right, the don't, as it was used in that speeches, was very clearly addressed to Iran. I mean, Joe Biden said, I'm saying this to actors around the region, to hostile actors around the region. Go back to look at the text. So strictly speaking, you're right. Strictly speaking, that's the reading of the speech. But you're absolutely right. Look, he was basically saying the United States is Israel's literal guarantor, right, with those aircraft carrier strike groups in the Eastern Mediterranean. And when you guarantee a loan, you exercise some control over how the person conducts his financial affairs, because you don't want to have to pay that loan back. And that's what's going on. Yes, the United States made that threat. Doesn't feel like having to carry it out and become involved in a Middle Eastern war. So yes, it's putting pressure on the Israeli government not to open up that front in the north. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu has more or less said that.
Schneider, on to you. Explain to me, the last 48 hours in the fighting in the north. I mean, all day since October 7th or 8th, when Hezbollah got involved, have been quite hectic. But the last 48 hours were much more violent, and one must be concerned whether we see at the beginning of a war that would none of the sides wish to start.
Well, if we go back to the beginning of this escalation, and also to the speeches of Nasrallah, there were two. He insisted that he's only helping or supporting the Hamas movement in Gaza by opening another front that will actually enforce itself on Israel. So Israel will be engaged in two fronts, and therefore its forces will be actually split between those two. And that's the logic that he presented, and he insists that this is the one and only reason why he is firing towards Israel, as part of the, I would say, convergence between the fronts. Now, what we see in the last 48 hours is, I would say even in the last 24 hours, that there's kind of escalation, which is also related to the Israeli response. I mean, Israel actually has its dilemma about whether it should try to push with all its force to make an end to this threat from Hezbollah right now, right here and right now, or to postpone it after we finish the engagement with Hamas, after we finish Hamas in Gaza, as the government declared, and then we get actually more involved with the North Front and decide what to do and how to do with Hezbollah. Now, you know, reality has its own rules and I would say, pressure on the decision makers here in Israel. And I think that what we see in the last 24 hours is much more decisiveness regarding elimination of Hezbollah threats, I would say, missiles and even personnel that were deployed along the border. And we've seen some assassinations, including today, not only of Hezbollah personnel, but also of Hamas, one of the leaders of Hamas that was shooting missiles toward Israel in the last couple of weeks. So according to that, I think that Hezbollah also understood that if Israel is trying to escalate, then it would also escalate its attacks, and therefore you have it. It's like a spiral of escalation that we see right now.
Yes, Chris, back to you. In the U.S., if the U.S. will need to get involved further to what we see in Syria and Iraq, to what extent of involvement Israel should expect?
I think that's going to largely depend on what Israel asks for. At the current moment, I think they're asking for replenishment, and that the IDF and the Air Force have everything they need under control. Should they need more, or should Hezbollah or the Houthis take action against U.S. forces? I think the discussion with Israel on what they need dissipates, and the U.S. takes their own action.
And still, I mean, attacking Iran, which might open a full-scale war, attacking Lebanon, just, you know, warning.
I would not expect an attack on Iran. I think that is the last step, because as you just pointed out, Yoav, that's going to lead to a conflagration that will embroil the entire area.
Yaron, you agree to that?
Yeah, I quite agree. And besides, let's think about the decision makers in Iran. You know, in the end, they are quite happy with what happens all around Iran without any direct involvement. Plus, they don't want to endanger the strategic project that they do want to keep safe, which is the nuclear project. And if there is something that they don't want to do, is to put it on risk. And besides, if they do want to keep Hezbollah alive, they don't want to get to a point in which Hezbollah is eliminated. This is maybe the one and only reason why they need Hezbollah. So in case that there is some kind of a war, some kind of direct confrontation between Israel, United States, both or each alone, with Iran, Hezbollah will be called to save Iran.